Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the one player you must draft in every single round of your 2023 fantasy football drafts. We're going to be talking about 13 players, one player in each of the first 13 rounds of 2023 fantasy football drafts that I think you guys are going to want to draft. Most drafts are typically 15 rounds, and in the last two rounds, you draft kicker and defense, so that's why we're going to be talking about 13 players. But before we can get on into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. While you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do hit a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFantasy, FNTSY. Thank you guys so much for 23,000 subscribers. I really appreciate you all. Let's get in to today's video. We begin with my must-draft player of round number 1, Cooper Kupp, wide receiver of the LA Rams, currently coming off the board on Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings as the wide receiver 3, at pick 9, underdog fantasy ADP has him as the wide receiver 3, at pick 4.4. Last year he was the wide receiver 24 in half PPR, but that is because he only played in 9 games last season. He was the wide receiver 1 in half PPR points per game. He had 98 targets, 10.9 per game, number 34 at wide receiver, 75 receptions, 8.3 per game, number 23, 812 receiving yards, 90.2 per game, number 33, and 7 total touchdowns, number 14 at wide receiver. Now, earlier on in the offseason, I understood why people were a little bit nervous about Cooper Kupp, and that was because of the health of Matthew Stafford. If Matthew Stafford wasn't going to be healthy, and the LA Rams had to roll out some other schlub at quarterback, then the upside of Cooper Kupp obviously would be capped. Now, I'm not saying if Stafford gets hurt and another quarterback comes in that Cooper Kupp's instantly going to combust, but his upside to being the number 1 guy will not be there without Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford's everything I've read about him looks very positive, that he's going to be good to go for week number 1, and we should not be worried at all about him. And as long as Matthew Stafford's good to go, I am all aboard the Cooper Kupp train. Right now, he's going off the board at the back half of the first round in most mock drafts. I know an underdog, you have to pay the pretty penny, right? Pick 4.4. He just recently surpassed Tyreek Hill as the wide receiver 3 on underdog fantasy ADP. I am willing to pay the price in the top 5 picks of the first round, and I am ecstatic to get him in the back half of the first round in a lot of redraft leagues. In terms of efficiency, Cooper Kupp still uber efficient, 2.15 target separation, 11th, 7.8 target accuracy, 18th, and a 52.3% dominator rating, first at wide receiver, and he only had 1 drop last season. Cooper Kupp has all the upside to be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy, and yet you can get him in the back half of the first round of a lot of drafts. Moving to round number 2, we got my guy Rhamondre Stevenson. Rhamondre Stevenson, running back of the New England Patriots. Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings have him as the running back 10 at pick 17, underdog fantasy ADP running back 9 at pick 26.6. Last year, despite the fact that the New England Patriots offense was a complete and utter unmitigated disaster, Stevenson finished as the RB11 in half PPR and the running back 14 in half PPR points per game, tied with Kenneth Walker III. Early on in last offseason, people were taking Damian Harris over Rhamondre Stevenson. I was a big Rhamondre Stevenson stan. I was a part of the bandwagon banging the drum, and then he eventually surpassed Damian Harris in ADP for a great reason, as Rhamondre Stevenson was amazing. 17 games played, 210 carries, 12.4 per game, number 17, 1,040 rushing yards, 61.2 per game, number 12, 89 targets, 5.2 per game, number 3, 69 receptions, very nice, I like, 4.1 per game, number 4, 421 receiving yards, 24.8 per game, number 7, and 6 total touchdowns, number 22. Again, on an offense that was led by a stooge, Matt Patricia, as their offensive coordinator. This is a team that went from Mac Jones to the Zappinator Bailey Zappi, and then back to Mac Jones again, right? This was an offense that was completely inept in 2022, and yet Rhamondre Stevenson was still feasting. He was still eating. So imagine what Rhamondre Stevenson is going to do when this Patriots offense is just a little bit better with their new offensive coordinator, Bill O'Brien. It's very easy to see a path for Rhamondre Stevenson to finish in the top 5 at running back. He gets the targets, he gets the receptions, the receiving yards, and he gets a bunch of carries. The only problem was he only scored 6 total touchdowns last year, which I think it's pretty easy to predict that going up, as long as we all assume that the Patriots offense is better. The Patriots also have an excellent defense, which is great for Rhamondre Stevenson, because if the team's up, they're going to run the rock deep into the game. The competition behind Rhamondre Stevenson is pretty mid, if I'm being honest with you. I think Pierre Strong is interesting because he has some pass catching upside, but ultimately, while maybe he could quote-unquote take away some targets, he's not taking away carries from Rhamondre Stevenson. And this guy was, again, really efficient in a not-so-great offense. 957 yards created, 56.3 per game, number 7. He was 7th in yards created per touch, 18th in true yards per carry, and 3rd in evaded tackles. This is a running back that plays extremely well in a system that wants to hand the bastard the ball. Don't overthink things when it comes to Rhamondre Stevenson. Round number 3, we got my boy Higgins, wide receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals, Fantasy Pros ECR wide receiver 12, at pick 27, underdog ADP wide receiver 14 at pick 23. Last year was the wide receiver 17.5 PPR and the wide receiver 19.5 PPR points per game. I like T. Higgins because he's a very safe option in the 3rd round, right? He wraps that metaphorical condom over your roster for that safety early on, right? Not taking too many risks early on in fantasy football drafts. But he also has really big upside because he's on one of the best offenses in the NFL, and he has even more upside if Ja'Marr Chase was to get hurt. Knock on wood, we don't root for injuries, but if something was to happen to Ja'Marr Chase, we all know that T. Higgins would be ranked inside the top 5, top 8 wide receivers every single week in fantasy football. And even when Ja'Marr Chase is healthy, T. Higgins is the 1B to Ja'Marr Chase's 1A. A lot of weeks when T. Higgins has a great matchup, he'll also be ranked inside the top 10, top 12 with Ja'Marr Chase. T. Higgins last year played in 16 games, having 111 targets, 6.5 per game, number 26, 75 receptions, 4.4 per game, number 23, 1,042 receiving yards, 61.3 per game, number 17, and 7 total touchdowns, 14th at wide receiver. He was 16th in yards per target and 11th in target accuracy in the NFL. I talked about this in yesterday's video when we went over Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is on the same offense. This is an incredibly explosive offense that in any given game could drop 32 plus points on a defense. And that gives T. Higgins so much upside. I really think he's a super safe pick with a lot of added upside. To me, he's a no-brainer pick inside of the 3rd round. I also want to note that I like all of the quarterbacks in the 3rd round as well, but I felt it was almost a cop-out going with Jalen Hurts in the 3rd round because he actually goes in the 4th round according to Fantasy Pros ECR. And if I'm being honest with you, I don't think he's going to fall into the 4th round of most fantasy football drafts. Moving now to round number 4, we have Amari Cooper, wide receiver of the Cleveland Browns, Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings, wide receiver 16 at pick 40, underdog ADP wide receiver 18 at pick 34.3. Last year, despite the fact that Deshaun Watson was really bad, despite the fact that Jacoby Brissett had to step in, and he actually played well early on in the season, right? Despite the fact that the quarterback play was pretty topsy-turvy, Amari Cooper was still able to have an amazing fantasy season. Wide receiver 10.5 PPR, wide receiver 15.5 PPR points per game, tied with the Slim Reaper Devontae Smith and Tyler Lockett in my pocket. Skirt! He played in 17 games last season, totaling 132 carries, 7.8 per game, number 16 at wide receiver, 78 receptions, 4.6 per game, number 18, 1,160 receiving yards, 68.2 per game, number 11, and 9 total touchdowns, 4th at wide receiver. You know, the quarterback play was not the best in Cleveland when this motherfucker had 870 unrealized air yards, 3rd at wide receiver, but he was still the 3rd most dominant wide receiver according to Player Profiler, 39.3% dominator rating. Now I know, but Nick, they brought in Elijah Moore. Nick, they have DPJ, they have David Njoku. Sure. But Amari Cooper is the clear number 1 in this offense. I believe Deshaun Watson is going to shake the rust off like his name was fucking Taylor Swift, and I think Deshaun Watson is going to be amazing this season, and that is obviously going to help out Amari Cooper a ton. If Deshaun Watson looks like how he looked last year, I'm going to look like a fucking idiot. I'm going to look very stupid talking up Amari Cooper this much, but if Deshaun Watson just gets some of what he had back in the past, I'm not even saying he has to look like MVP Deshaun Watson, I think Amari Cooper's upside is really good. I wouldn't even be shocked if by the time we got to late August, early September, if I even put him inside the top 12 of my wide receiver rankings, because I like him that much. Again, right now he's the wide receiver 16 on Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings and the wide receiver 18 on Underdog Fantasy. People seem to really be sleeping on Amari Cooper, even though he goes in the 4th round. I think he could easily be a 3rd round pick in a ton of fantasy football drafts, especially when you compare him to guys like DK Metcalf. I don't like DK Metcalf, but I really like Amari Cooper. Before we move on into the rest of the rounds here, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy has the best part about fantasy football, and that is the best ball contest, because best ball is just the draft, and that's it. You draft your fantasy football team, and that's it. It's an 18-round draft, and then you can forget about it because there's no waiver wire, there's no in-season management, and there's no trades. At the end of every single week, Underdog automatically puts your highest scoring players into your lineup for you. If you're someone who sometimes makes the wrong decision, you accidentally bench some running back that you've never heard of that is like the 6th string guy on your bench, and that guy scores 40 fantasy points, guess what? You don't have to worry about having to start him because Underdog automatically puts him in your lineup. They have the biggest fantasy football contest ever. $25 to enter, 150 max entries, $3 million in first place, $15 million in total entries. If you don't want to join these big tournaments, they also have just regular 12-team leagues for as low of prices as $3. I think it's a great way to mock draft as well. You can actually win some money from it, and you're drafting against people who actually care, and there's no kickers or defenses, but no one's going to make some crazy pick inside the 1st round and ruin your mock draft. So I love Underdog Fantasy. If you use promo code Notorious or click on the link in the video description, you will get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. So you deposit $100, you get an additional $100. If you deposit 50, an additional 50, 25, an additional 25. Make sure you guys check that out. Link in the video description. Moving now to round number 5, my must-draft player of round number 5. We got Christian Watson, wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers. ECR on Fantasy Pros, wide receiver 25 at pick 58. Underdog ADP, wide receiver 20 at pick 39.4. He was the wide receiver 34 in half PPR last year and the wide receiver 30 in half PPR points per game. He played in 14 games last season with 11 starts, having 65 targets, 4.6 per game, number 65, 41 receptions, 2.9 per game, number 64, 611 receiving yards, 43.6 per game, number 52, and 9 total touchdowns, 4th at wide receiver. Now, I know what a lot of people are thinking. Nick, he's going from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. I don't want anything to do with that. Well, last year, Christian Watson ranked 41st in target accuracy, so I don't think it would get significantly worse with Jordan Love, and he also had a 102.5% true catch rate, 7th at wide receiver, so if the ball was anywhere in the same stratosphere as Christian Watson, the motherfucker caught it. He caught it. Jordan Love gets a lot of hate for really no reason. Now, do I think that he's going to be a home run pick like when they drafted Aaron Rodgers or like when they traded Brett Favre from the Atlanta Falcons? Probably not. But I think he's a serviceable quarterback, and I think Christian Watson's the clear number 1 on this offense. Now, we've seen some hype out of camp for Romeo Doubs, some hype for Jaden Reed, but ultimately, Christian Watson has proved that he's the guy. He even scored a touchdown when Jordan Love was playing quarterback. So I like Christian Watson a ton. I think the Green Bay Packers are getting a lot of hate for really no reason. Again, I get that Jordan Love isn't going to be fucking discount, double check, back-to-back MVP Aaron Rodgers, but I don't think he necessarily has to be for Christian Watson to be a great pick in fantasy. Wide receiver 25 off the board right now on Fantasy Pros. Wide receiver 20 on Underdog. I got him closer to the Underdog wide receiver number 20. Moving to round number 6, we got Justin Fields, quarterback of the Chicago Bears. Fantasy Pros ECR quarterback 6 at pick 63. Underdog ADP quarterback 6 at pick 49.2. Now, I am even willing to reach on Justin Fields in the 5th round because I like him so much. I love Justin Fields. He has all of the upside of a quarterback that can run the ball, and you know, in running, or in fantasy football, running is one of the biggest keys for quarterbacks because you only have to run 10 yards in most leagues to get 1 point, and you only have to, and you would have to throw 25 yards to normally get 1 point. So the guys that can run for a lot of yards get a humongous boost. They also bring in DJ Moore, and they have a better offensive line. Now, do they have the best offensive line or wide receiver core in the NFL? Fuck no, baby. But they do upgrade both, and I think that's going to help out Justin Fields a ton. It was very clear that around the halfway point of last season, the Chicago Bears realized that what they were doing with Justin Fields was completely wrong. They were trying to make this guy play a different version of football. Matt Eberflus wanted him to play football how Justin Fields doesn't play football. They didn't let him loose, right? They didn't let him scramble around. They didn't let him run for a zillion fucking yards every game. They didn't design that. But later on in the season, we started to see what Justin Fields could do if the team matched his play style. And when they did, his ceiling was quarterback 1 weekly. Quarterback 6 last year on the season, and quarterback 6 in points per game, tied with Lamar Jackson. 15 games played, 318 passing attempts, 21.2 per game. Number 27, 2,242 passing yards, 149.5 per game. Number 26, 17 passing touchdowns at a 5.3% rate, 16, 11 interceptions, 10th. But the kicker here, obviously, 160 carries, second, 1,143 rushing yards, first, and 8 rushing touchdowns, second. I will push back on anyone who thinks Justin Fields is some dog shit passer. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Rodgers in the pocket, right? But he doesn't have to be. 53.9 QBR, 17th, 7.4 red zone accuracy, 4th, 5.9 deep ball accuracy, 16th. I think the addition of DJ Moore is going to be really key because Justin Fields hasn't really had a true number one wide receiver. Sure, they brought in Chase Claypool. Sure, they got my guy Darnell. Here comes the Mooney. But at the end of the day, DJ Moore is an upper echelon wide receiver in the NFL. Now, maybe to most, he hasn't topped the top 12, right? He hasn't entered the top 12, but I think he has that upside. He's always been stuck in Carolina with these absolute dog shit quarterbacks. Now he gets Justin Fields, a huge step up for him. Again, the offensive line is going to be better. I love rushing quarterbacks, and I think it's crazy that Justin Fields goes in the 6th round of most fantasy drafts. Moving now to round number 7 must-draft player, we got Darren Waller, tight end of the New York Football Giants. Fantasy Pros ECR, tight end 7 at pick 75. Underdog ADP, tight end 7 at pick 80.6. Tight end 28.5 PPR last year with the Las Vegas Raiders. Tight end 10 in half PPR points per game. He played in 9 games last season, 43 targets, 4.8 per game, 31st. 28 receptions, 3.1 per game, 35th, 3 total touchdowns, 20th, and 388 receiving yards, 43.1 per game, number 27. He was 5th in yards per target and 3rd in yards per reception. Let's be honest about the Giants. Daniel Jones took a step up last year due to the head coaching change, going from that stooge Joe Judge to a genius, a guru in Brian Daboll, who was hanging his Brian Dabolls on the defense's chest every single week. Darren Waller enters this team as potentially the best pass catcher, not named Saquon Barkley, on this team. Nick, you love Isaiah Hodgins. I do. I love Isaiah Hodgins. But let's be honest with you. Darren Waller is a freak of nature. He's a freak of a man. He's a big boy who has amazing hands. He could potentially lead this team in targets. The only worry that people have about Waller is his health. And I get that, but when you're early on in drafts, I talked about with T. Higgins, right? T. Higgins is like wrapping a condom onto your team, metaphorically protecting it from bad things. He still has that crazy upside, but he's very safe. Once you're in the 7th round, you want to take the condom off. You want to go raw. You want to raw dog things. And Darren Waller has that raw dog upside to be a top 3 tight end. Now, do I think he's necessarily going to pass Kelsey and become the tight end number 1? Without injury, I'd be hard-pressed to see that. But Darren Waller is a legitimate top 3, at least a top 5 tight end talent in the NFL. And I think that people are disrespecting him. I know his health is a concern, but in round 7, I'm looking to get a little spicy. I'm looking to draft off of upside. And Darren Waller, again, could be the number 1 target on this Giants offense. Moving to round number 8, staying in the NFC East with our must-draft player, Antonio Gibson, running back of the Washington Commanders. Left hand up. Who are we? The Commanders. Fantasy Pros, ECR, running back 35 at pick 86. Underdog ADP, running back 32 at pick 100.1. He was the running back 30.5 PPR last season and the running back 33.5 PPR points per game, tied with Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. He played in 15 games with 6 starts, 149 carries, 9.9 per game, number 34, 546 rushing yards, 36.4 per game, number 36, 58 targets, 3.9 per game, number 12, 46 receptions, 3.1 per game, number 13, 353 receiving yards, 23.5 per game, number 13. And 5 total touchdowns, 31st. He had a 12% target share, 11th, 79.3 true catch rate, 12th, and 7.7 yards per reception, 12th. J.D. McKisson titties. J.D. McKissick is gone. It's Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson. Does this mean that I hate Brian Robinson in fantasy? No. I don't mind Brian Robinson either. But I think Antonio Gibson's the guy that's going to be catching passes. Brian Robinson's the big bruiser back. He's the fucking wrecking ball of the offense. This is a team with a young quarterback in Sam Howell. Typically, the younger quarterbacks tend to dump the ball off more, which adds even further upside to Antonio Gibson. I think in a vacuum, while I shit on Antonio Gibson a lot all of last season, his performance during the season kind of changed my mind on him. I think Antonio Gibson is a better player than people give him credit for. He's on an offense now without Carson Wentz, without Taylor Heineke, with Sam Howell, and with Jacoby Brissett. So if things go wrong, you go to one of those other guys. And I think that's a better quarterback room than what they had last season. I think Antonio Gibson is, again, a skilled pass catcher in an offense that might be sneaky good with a defense that's sneaky bad, even though how people over the last couple of years got down on their knees and gave the Commanders defense the Gawk Gawk 9000. They bring in Eric Bieniemy. I think this offense, again, is going to take that next step up. I think Antonio Gibson's going to be a crucial part of this offense, and I think on a weekly basis, he has top 24 running back upside, which is exactly what you're looking for when you're drafting a running back at running back 35. On Underdog, he's running back 32. So, again, when you're this late in the draft, I'm not looking for Antonio Gibson to finish in the top 12. Now, could he do that? If everything rolls correctly, maybe, right? But you're looking for just a guy that's a fill-in at times or has the upside in a great matchup to do good. And I think that's exactly what Antonio Gibson has. And again, he is in the range of running backs where you're looking at handcuffs. And if Brian Robinson goes down, we all know, knock on wood, there is some big ceiling for Antonio Gibson. Moving now to round number 9, we got my boy Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback of the Miami Dolphins. ECR and Fantasy Pros, quarterback 11, pick 100. Underdog ADP, quarterback 10, pick 91.6. Now, if you guys know anything about me, you would know that I am a Tua Tagovailoa fanboy. I'm a Dolphins fan, but I call it how it is. When Tua didn't look great in his career with Brian Flores, while he showed some bright spots, he wasn't a startable quarterback in fantasy, and I told you guys that. But last year, when Mike McDaniel became the head coach of the team, I knew something different was going to happen, and I knew Tua was going to have a lot more upside. They brought in Tyreek Hill, they already had Jaylen Waddle. This was looking fucking beautiful. And things were, until he got hurt. Quarterback 15. Last year, quarterback 12 in points per game. He played in 13 games last season. Obviously, the terrible concussion against the Bengals, and then gets hurt against the Packers and shoves a dagger in the Dolphins season. I'm not blaming Tua. That shit sucks, right? There's no way to predict something like that can happen, and it's terrible. I will never blame someone for getting hurt. That sucks. Tua's been doing a bunch of training this offseason to try to limit his impact of him falling backwards and smashing his head on the ground. And we all know it could still happen. He's also wearing the state-of-the-art helmet to try to prevent concussions. He had 400 passing attempts last season, 30.8 per game. 30 pass attempts per game, 18th at quarterback, 3,548 passing yards, 272.9 per game, 12th, 25 passing touchdowns, 6.3% rate, 8th, 8 interceptions, 20th at quarterback, and he has some rushing upside, but if I'm being honest, I've talked about this before as a Dolphins fan, don't run the ball, Tua. Don't lower your shoulder into the defense. He ran a Jets guy over in 2022 or 2021. In 2022, he tried to do the same thing when he came back from his concussion against the Steelers. Don't do that. 24 rushes, 70 rushing yards, just don't rush at all. I'd be fine with that. In terms of efficiency, Tua is a wet dream for that. 92 true passer rating, 11th, 3rd in QBR, 1st in yards per pass attempt, 9.3 air yards per attempt, 3rd, 7th in accuracy rating, 1st in deep ball completion percentage, 2nd in red zone completion percentage. This guy's the perfect package for fantasy, besides the fact that he can't run. Or he can run, but I don't want him to. He's not going to run that much. He has probably the best wide receiver duo in the NFL in Tyreek and Jaylen Waddle. He has an offensive coordinator, or he's a head coach that was a former offensive coordinator that is a fucking guru in the pass game. He has 2 of the best receivers in the NFL. He's a very accurate quarterback and 2 of the fastest wide receivers in the NFL. And he has fast running backs he could throw the ball to, and the offensive line has gotten better. Everything is lining up for a humongous Tua season. The only negative, again, Nick, he keeps getting hurt. Sure, that would matter if Tua was coming off the board in the 5th round. But it's round number 9. Sometimes it's round 10 or 11 we can get Tua. Don't be scared to be a little risky at this point. Even though I don't think the risk is as high as most people. Again, I'm not being a fanboy. I like the Dolphins, but I've told you guys for years, when the Dolphins were terrible, I wasn't telling you guys to draft every Dolphins player. I just really believe in this Dolphins team, and I believe that Mike McDaniel has turned this team into potential Super Bowl contenders and has turned Tua into that quarterback we all thought he was. Coming out of Alabama, moving to round number 10, we got another quarterback, Geno Smith, quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks, Fantasy Pros ECR quarterback 14, pick 109, Underdog ADP quarterback 15, pick 114.4. Now, previously, I was kind of a detractor of Geno Smith. I thought, you know what? Geno Smith had a hot year last year. The haters wrote him off, but he didn't write back. All that fucking journalism, all that talk, right? I was wrong. I said Geno Smith sucked. I thought Horsecock Drew Lock was going to take over. Didn't happen. Geno Smith played good. And then, in the offseason, I was like, you know what? Maybe that was just a flash in the pan. Maybe Geno is not that guy. You're not that guy, pal. Maybe he's not. And then they draft JSN. And they draft Zach Charbonnet. And I start to think, you know what? Even if Geno isn't very good, even if he's carried by his weapons, they just added the best wide receiver in the NFL draft to their team. So they have JSN, Tyler Lockett in my pocket skirt, and fucking DK Metcalf, the Greek god. They have an amazing trio at wide receiver. So even if Geno isn't the best, you don't have to be when you have that many weapons at your disposal. He was the quarterback 5 last year, quarterback 11 in points per game, 17 games played last season, 572 passing attempts, 33.6 per game, number 9, 4,282 passing yards, 251.9 per game, 8th, 30 passing touchdowns, 5.2% rate, 4th. Typically, when the passing touchdown rate is around 5, that means that that's pretty normal. So I think Geno had a pretty normal year last year, and maybe he could have an outlier year and throw 6% rate and score even more touchdowns. 11 interceptions, 10th. He has some sneaky rushing upside, 68 carries, one off of being very nice with 69, 366 rushing yards, 8th, so 8th in carries, 8th in rushing yards, 20th in rushing touchdowns. Again, is Geno Smith Lamar Jackson? Is he Justin Fields? Is he Mike Vick? Is he Jalen Hurts? No. But is he a little bit more mobile than a guy like Dak Prescott? Yes. Efficiency stats, this really shocked me how efficient he was. 10th in red zone accuracy, 3rd in deep ball accuracy, and 3rd in under pressure accuracy, 6th in QBR, 17th in true passer rating. Despite the fact that, again, I still don't think Geno Smith is very good. Situation matters so much. I think even the people who think that Tua might just suck have to admit that the situation's too good to fade him. It's the same thing with Geno Smith. I was fading him like the fucking plague last year, but I'm all in on Geno this year. So if you don't get Tua in the 9th round, I'm very excited to get Geno Smith in the 10th round. Moving to round number 11, we're closing out today's video. We're getting close. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button if you have enjoyed. We're going back to the Dolphins. Well, Devin, 2 chains. Devin off the chain. Devin Achane, running back of the Miami Dolphins. Fantasy Pros ECR, running back 47 at pick 130. Underdog ADP, running back 39 at pick 119.2. I have been smashing Devin Achane in fantasy football drafts. Pause, like it's my job. I love Devin Achane. Now, there's still a chance Dalvin Cook appears out of nowhere like an RKO from Randy Orton. He comes out the grass like a fucking enemy Pokemon when you're playing the Pokemon games, right? But if Dalvin Cook doesn't show up, sure, they have Mostert and they have Jeff Wilson. Devin Achane has looked great in these early kind of training sessions that they have. And Mike McDaniel, it was reported that he lobbied heavily to pick him. This is a guy with 99th percentile 40-yard dash in the NFL, 4.32, 88th percentile speed score. And there's already a lot of talks that Devin Achane is going to line up at wide receiver. Now, is that going to happen all the time during games? Of course not. But when you have a guy as fast as Achane, when you're getting him at running back 47 to 39 on Underdog, you're just hoping that as the season goes on, he chips away at the role, starts to move up in snap count, catch some balls, and maybe get more touches in the offense to where he's incredibly valuable for fantasy because he's on a high-octane offense. He looked great all 3 years in Texas, at Texas A&M, in my opinion. He played 10 games last year, 21 years old, 196 rushes for 1,102 rushing yards, 36 receptions for 196 receiving yards, and 11 total touchdowns. He's not the biggest running back on earth, but I think that his skill set best fits this offense for the pass-catching game, so I think he's going to be in the game in pass-catching situations. I think that while I like Mostert, we all know he's kind of injury-prone. Jeff Wilson, Hefe Wilson, gets banged up at times too. So Devin Achane is in a good spot in Miami. He's a fast player. He's a big boom pick, right? If everything goes right, I think he could be a reliable running back to like back end running back 2, running back 3. or like a flex option in deeper leagues. Again, I'm not saying that this guy's going to smash in fantasy, but he has all of the skill set to potentially take over as the lead back in Miami. Moving now to round number 12, we got Jaylen Warren, running back of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Fantasy Pros ECR running back 49 at pick 140. Underdog ADP running back 44 at pick 134.7. He was the running back 51.5 PPR last season and the running back 64.5 PPR points per game. He played in 16 games last season, but he had 0 starts. I'm going to rattle off the stats. They're not good, obviously. He didn't start a single fucking game. 77 carries, 379 rushing yards, 33 targets, 28 receptions, 214 receiving yards, 28th, and 1 total touchdown, 71st, though he was incredibly efficient. 4.7 true yards per carry, 12th, 11th in yards per touch, and 5th in yards created per touch. The Athletics, Mark Kaboly writes, there is no way offensive coordinator Matt Canada can keep him off the field as much as they did last season. Now, if we know anything about Matt Canada, is that the guy's a dumb bastard. The guy's dumb. So, kind of take this with a grain of salt. I think Jaylen Warren is one of the better handcuffs in fantasy, and he comes in the 12th round, which is great. So you get a nice handcuff with the added upside that maybe the offense figures things out and scales back on Warren, or not scales back on Warren, scales up on Warren, scales back on Najee Harris. Najee Harris has been so good due to volume, not necessarily due to efficiency. So if Warren gets more usage, that's obviously going to hurt Harris, and that gives Warren the upside to take over. And if Harris was to get hurt, knock out what we don't root for injuries, then obviously Jaylen Warren could potentially be jolted into superstardom for fantasy football. To close this video out, round 13, because again, round 14, 15, most leagues are 15 rounds. Rounds 14 and 15 is when you're drafting your kicker and your defense. So round 13, Skyy with 2 Ys more, wide receiver, the Kansas City Chiefs. ECR on Fantasy Pros, wide receiver 62 at pick 145. Underdog ADP, wide receiver 54 at pick 113.5. Andy Reid has stated that Moore has taken a good jump in this offense, and he's running with the first team in OTAs. He also noticed that Moore was one of the higher targeted receivers in minicamp. So, again, minicamp doesn't mean anything. But let's be honest, he was a second-round pick in 2022. The other wide receivers in Kansas City are not the best. They got MVS, Kadarius Toney, Rashee Rice, Richie James, I'm Rick James, bitch, and Justin Ross. Again, we all know Kadarius Toney is best used by not playing a bunch and being a little bit of a gadget player, despite the fact that he goes in like the 7th round of fantasy drafts. We all know MVS hasn't been able to really consistently perform. So why not the second-round receiver for the 2022 NFL Draft? Now, if I start reading off his stats, they're useless. He had 33 targets, 22 receptions, 250 receiving yards. He didn't qualify for any efficiency stats because he didn't play enough games. He wasn't great last year. I get it. But when you're in the 13th round, you want to be taking the shot on the upside. You want to be taking the shot from the fucking moon, Stephen Curry style, half-court shot, full-court shot to try to get the guy. So if you can find the Kansas City wide receiver 1 in round 13, why not try it? If he's not the guy, a couple weeks in, you just cut him. I'm not even claiming Skyy Moore is all that amazing of a player. It's just the competition really isn't great in Kansas City besides Travis Kelce's. Thank you guys all so much for watching. If you ended up enjoying today's video, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below as well as hitting that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Again, make sure you guys check out Underdog Fantasy, link in the video description for that first match deposit bonus of up to $100. Deposit $100, you get an additional $100. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great guys' day. And as always, good boy.